Good evening, everyone. It is indeed an honor and pleasure to be here with you all tonight for this talkback panel on shared legacies. We have the honor and privilege to have three phenomenal panelists with us tonight, and I am only going to do a very brief introduction because we want to dive right in and have a dialogue around this phenomenal movie. We have with us Ambassador Andrew Young, who needs no introduction. Ambassador Young was a civil rights movement leader, and he continues to do that today. He was the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and a close confidant of Martin Luther King Jr. Ambassador Young was the mayor of Atlanta and also the U.S. ambassador in the Carter administration. And we are really happy to have you with us. And Ms. Shari Frank, you have done tremendous good in the community. You were the executive director of the Atlanta office of the American Jewish Committee and helped guide the National Council of Jewish Women. And you continue to be a lifelong activist on civil rights and human issues today. And last but not least, Dr. Shari Rogers, who is the director of this phenomenal film. And Dr. Rogers has also been a civil rights activist today and continues to be by documenting this important history. So before we start, I would like to just take a few moments to do a bit of a framing, because I think the importance of having the three of you here speaks volumes. And we really want to make the connection to what happened during the civil rights movement to today. And if we just take a few moments to look around, to just look around where we are, we continue to have much more work to do. And so we are here today to have those discussions. And we are really happy that you all are here with us today. So I'm just going to dive right in and ask a general question for all of you. And that's basically to think about where we are today and what you would want to share with the audience, even if it's about shared legacies, the movie, the state of where we are today, or anything that's coming up for you right now that you'd like to share. And if I could start with you, Shari Frank, could you start?
Sure. Well, the beauty of shared legacies is it gives us the history, and it provides, I think, for all of us, a safety net for Black-Jewish relations to continue to build upon for every decade. But I think we only need to look at the attack on voting rights, the attack on civil disobedience, everything that's happening in our polarized world to say we really need this Black-Jewish coalition more than ever. And I think it's epitomized more in the election of the two senators from Georgia, Senator Warsoff and Ossoff, who both show how important the legacy is, but how important their shared legacy is in building a future together.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much, Shari. Ambassador Young.
Yeah, I think that we're pulling together a coalition of the persecuted and abused. And I was just saying that it was the bombing of the temple in Atlanta at the time of Martin Luther King's winning the Nobel Prize that created and Shari institutionalized the Black Jewish Coalition in Atlanta, which has basically run Atlanta from Sam Massell right on through to John Lewis. But we've since added the history that was abused because of immigration, and then more recently, the Asian community. And I think we really have a majority of the persecuted. And that we saw that swing, not only the vote with Warnock and Ossoff, but Cobb County and Gwinnett County now have majority of minorities. And we have two congresswomen from Cobb and Gwinnett County. It's because the coalition, I mean, we were always open to the Asian community, but they sort of stood aloof until they began to be persecuted. The same thing was true with the Hispanic community. They integrated quite well when they came in from Cuba, but they were given money by the US government, but they didn't do that with those coming from the islands and from Mexico. And as we have seen, we have a majority of minorities. And you have to add to that white people, Anglo-Saxons of goodwill who help to make what is in fact a moral majority, that as we can keep it together, we might save the soul, or as Martin Luther King used to say, we're in this to redeem the soul of America. It's not just for our own survival, but we know what America could be if we all work together and shared a vision, a biblical vision. And that's where we're seeing that emerge now. But we also saw it on the front row of the march from Selma to Montgomery, where you had Rabbi Heschel and Archbishop Jacobus of the Greek Orthodox Church, and Martin Luther King, and Ralph Bunche along the front row of that march. And it's just a continuation of what we have done, but we didn't have it on film like you have it, Shari. We have it documented now, and we have it documented in a wonderful and entertaining way that we really appreciate. And I want to thank you for taking the time and putting your talents into telling this story for our country.
So honored, my goodness. I'm so honored. And I just have to thank Sherry Frank in Atlanta and Ambassador Young for opening up their home to this film, because Atlanta is the beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King so invested in and built. And it continues to be that beloved community. When Sherry Frank and I met, she made sure that she helped us. She was actually even in the interview when we interviewed Ambassador Young and blessed memory Congressman John Lewis and Reverend C.T. Vivian. And kind of echoing after what Ambassador Young just said, I was so emotionally moved that we included what Congressman Lewis said at the end of the movie. He said at the time, this is before he passed away, that we are all living in fear. But he would have to envision that if Dr. Martin Luther King were alive today and Rabbi Joshua Heschel, they would be pulling together for those generations yet unborn. So I think symbolically, he understood what the two of them meant and what this historical coalition meant, not only to Atlanta, but to the entire country, about their biblical understanding and their connectivity around morality and ethics and the possibilities that can come from really understanding this. And what we did achieve, not only were we two persecuted communities, but even though we had differences, we achieved a lot, and we still have a long way to go.
So, and Ambassador Young, you said something that really resonated with me that I want to pull out, and it's about redeeming the soul of America. And I find that very powerful. And I was thinking about this with the historical lens through the civil rights movement, that the entire South was definitely kind of the hotbed of the civil rights movement. Mississippi and Alabama. I'm from Mississippi, and I kind of reference Mississippi and Alabama as the heart of the civil rights movement, and Atlanta, Georgia as the soul of the civil rights movement. And so this is a question for all of you. Fast forwarding to today and thinking about the deep ties and relationships between Blacks and Jews, how do we continue to make sure we're building that foundation for these two communities to stay connected and be the model for what it is to actually work together in coalitions and be a part of a movement together? And of course, with the election of our two senators recently, that's an illustration of that, I think. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah. Completing that sentence, to redeem the soul of America from the triple evils of racism, war, and poverty. And where we are now is redeeming the soul of America from poverty. And I don't know, Atlanta has had from the time of Maynard Jackson, well, it was Sam Massell really that started the joint ventures between Black and, it was supposedly Black and white, but it ended up mostly being Black and Jewish businesses coming together and working together to build our mass transit system in 1971. Then Maynard Jackson, in building the airport, increased it to 25%. Now, that gave us an opportunity to do joint ventures that I think are continuing today. And the economy in Atlanta is fairly well integrated. At those who have education and training, where we're lagging is that, well, because of the turmoil in the rest of the South and in northern cities, we've grown from about 1 million people when I started as my career as mayor to now we're almost 7 million. And a lot of that is business coming in, but even more of that is poverty coming in. The people who were flooded out in New Orleans, many of them divided up between Atlanta and Houston. When Detroit's automobile industry failed back in the 70s, we had a mass migration of poverty, people seeking jobs and opportunity from Detroit and Newark, so that we keep getting people coming in, and it takes us a long time to integrate and absorb them, especially when we're in the kind of climate we're in now. But actually, it looks like we're going to come out of this pretty good. Well, I don't know how it's going to happen, but we're gradually, they had fans in the in the soccer stadium this weekend, and 50% filled, and it was 50% at the baseball diamond. Interesting. Let me just put in a commercial here, because we used to think of Cobb County as the center of racial discord in Georgia. But Cobb County now has 3 Black women commissioners and 2 white women commissioners. And it has a Black male sheriff. And they're doing quite well politically and economically. But Major League Baseball pulled out the All-Star game, and it cost the new leadership $100 million that they desperately needed to help come out of this pandemic. So these are complicated times, and I've been an advocate of sanctions and boycotts all my life, but we've always been very careful about calling for sanctions and boycotts. And anybody that's calling for boycotting Atlanta at a time when we're doing it together, everything is working, but we are a $400 billion economy in the metropolitan area of Atlanta. But the state of Georgia is less than half that size. And the problems are with the state of Georgia. And so people get mad with Georgia and want to boycott, but there's nothing to boycott in Georgia. So they want to boycott Atlanta. And that's not helping us. We do better when we're prospering together. And we even work with the state trying to bring them into the prosperity of the city. And in fact, that's what we've done in the last few elections. And one of the reasons why all of the counties around Atlanta now have black leadership in the majority. But that's a liberal coalition that in most cases, though nobody talks about it, it is Black and Jewish leadership working together.
There, you know, I find institutionally a lot of reason for hope. Congressman Lewis always talked about the next generation. And we see in the American Jewish Committee now nationally a commitment of the Young Leadership Group of the American Jewish Committee and the Young Leadership Group of Urban League in every city have made a commitment to do Black-Jewish relations and team building. The American Jewish Committee just played a role, and Congressman Lewis was the founding member of the brand new Black-Jewish Congressional Caucus. AJC just finished a Black-Jewish teen series, bringing teenagers together for a whole year of meetings, even though they did it virtually. Goodness knows what we can do next year when we can do it in person. And through the National Council of Jewish Women, I work on a daily basis with coalitions working for social justice issues to bring us to that beloved community. And it ranges from voting rights to healthy babies and healthy mothers, and working to make sure that there's more coverage for minority women. And I think institutionally, and JCPA plays a role as well in our community, bringing coalitions together. And the Black and Jewish members of those coalitions are the driving forces.
Thanks, Shari. Dr. Rogers, you have something to add to that question or thoughts around?
Thank you. I just feel proud of the fact that our film was able to capture so many of these lions, if you will, who are, some of them are in their late early 90s, who could give their personal stories of what they witnessed. When we had the privilege of interviewing Reverend C.T. Vivian, who President Obama said was one of our greatest reverends that ever lived, you know, he said nobody ever asked him about this history and what he witnessed. And we felt privileged to spend a couple of days with him to really hear his testimony and his personal recollections. And as we're going around the country, and the film is being used as a tool to start important conversations about racism and anti-Semitism, we're hearing stories all over the country that a lot of people don't know about. So I think that this is one of the most important intergroup coalitions historically, and there's many lessons today that we can learn from and be inspired from as we're moving forward in building bridges.
Well, you know, I come from New Orleans. And the Nazi party was on the corner of my house. And my daddy was a dentist, and many of the dental supply people happened to be Jewish. Well, I never thought of that, except they were always talking about what was going on in Europe. And I found myself reading books on the Diary of Anne Frank, and from death camp to existentialism. I mean, it was the intellectual climate around my house was a Black and Jewish business and social relationship. And we grew up with that. Last couple of weeks ago, I was asked by Rabbi Gensler to do a Zoom call with him because he wanted to record the experiences that we had together. And frankly, I couldn't remember, but when we got on the air, he's now, I think, 94, and I'm 89, and we started reminiscing, and he and Rabbi Dresner always gave me grief because they went to jail in Albany, and I didn't. But when we started talking about their visits to Albany and to St. Augustine, and coming down to Selma, and that the entire struggle has depended on the moral majority that we were able to create. And essentially that was Black and Jewish and Christians of goodwill, and all of the Christians are not the evangelicals, that basically confine their Christianity to a kind of otherworldly Pauline, St. Paul theology. The Methodists and congregational churches, by and large, are just as grounded in the Old Testament as we are. And I think turn on a radio and find any Sunday, you find preachers preaching, and they are preaching about the moral. Well, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, then they will hear from heaven and I will heal their land. I think that's the book of Chronicles. And I would imagine that is the most widely preached text in Protestant churches during this period, because we're all looking for moral authority, and we find that in the Jewish tradition.
You know, I think I'm 78, and I feel a real passion to make sure that the things that I care deeply about transcend to the next generation. I worked with Gene Young in the 1970s for the Equal Rights Amendment. Today, I work with Ambassador Young's daughter, Andrea Young, who's doing an amazing job at ACLU, and that's the next generation. But sorry about that. But what's so exciting to me is Andrea Young's daughter and her baby are about to move to Atlanta, and I've said to them, to Andrea, I can't wait to get your daughter into the Black Jewish Coalition. It is run today by Access, the Young Division. And I've been part of a Black Jewish women's group with folks like Mayor Shirley Franklin and Janetta Cole, who was president of Spelman. And today there's now a Young Sisters group. And I've already given them a heads up that Andrea Young's daughter is coming to town. We got to make sure that that young woman is part of the young women meeting today and making a difference. So the Black Jewish Alliance will live on in the work that we continue to do as we reach out to that next generation.
I think that's phenomenal. And there seems to be many, many examples of the continued, foundation of relationship building and being a part of community, being a part of the beloved community that is continuing to happen today. One of the things that, listening to this conversation made me think about is the need to also understand that the Black and Jewish communities are not monolithic or binaries, that there are people who are Black and Jewish, and that, those are things that we want to make sure are part of the conversations and the relationship building that's happening. And a little of that came out, I think, in Shared Legacies as well, Dr. Rogers. One of the things I wanted to focus on with you, Dr. Rogers, is this idea of religion and the moral authority piece, and how much that played a role in the film, as well as the broader civil rights movement. And maybe all of you could speak to that, but Dr. Rogers, if you could talk about that. It was just so prominent in the movie and made it really so powerful and so meaningful.
Well, for me also as a Jewish woman, and learning how important the Jewish biblical stories were to Dr. King and inspiring the Black-led civil rights movement, I think of Moses as the foundational social justice warrior, if you will, and how Dr. King used the Moses story to be empowering in the songs, you know, go down Moses, let my people go. And so many of these stories, how important they were. So you can imagine as a Jewish woman in the Jewish community, how proud we must feel that Dr. Martin Luther King used so many of those stories. And Dr. Susanna Heschel often talks that it was 30 years after the Holocaust when many of our Bibles were burned in Nazi Germany. And so for Dr. King to reach out to the rabbis and to carry this Old Testament and lift this up to be inspirational was so important.
You know, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure we reached out to the rabbis as so much as they reached out to us. I mean, it was a sort of a, like, we did send out a call to come to sell, but it was y'all come. And it just happened that there was a rabbinical convention going on in upstate New York, and many of them just packed up and came on down with 1 day's notice. So it was really, well, for me, it was all of this movement is really led by the Spirit. And there is a spiritual connection. I believe God is still on the throne. And this country has been through the valley of the shadow of death in the last, few years. And we're still not out. But we came very close, and we're still not home free yet, to being Nazified. That the legislation in the Georgia legislature, and that same legislation has been sent 47 different states. And yes, they do have some good things in terms of voting, but they're very subtle, and then not so subtle things that give the state the chance to take over the electors of a county if there are complaints. And by and large, that is exactly what our former president was trying to get our governor to do. And he and the Secretary of State would not do it. But the network is still going on around in Georgia. And for me, it's still pretty much, I don't know whether you remember J.B. Stoner, who was a radical anti-Semite, anti-Black, anti-everything. And he used to get 30,000 votes in Georgia. Close to 30% of the vote in Georgia. Lester Maddox got more than that. Now, Lester Maddox wasn't the same as J.B. Stoner. I learned to work with Lester Maddox and Herman Talmadge, but there was no working with the J.B. Stoner types. And that's what we have now, asserting influence in the name of our former president, and wanting to corrupt the election process. And that's a serious threat to democracy, not just in Georgia, in 47 states.
and the legacy of John Lewis, just about risking his life to protect the vote, calls on us to work twice as hard to protect that vote. When you were talking about religion, I thought about two of the most powerful times in the Black Jewish Coalition. One was our annual Black Jewish Seder, when people came together and retold the story of the Exodus and how familiar the story was for Blacks and Jews, when we would lift up voices, contemporary voices who still fight that struggle. And I also remember Ambassador Young said the rabbis came to us. I remember when it was the 20th anniversary of the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and we decided as the Black Jewish Coalition we would go. And the first person who said, I want to go, was Rabbi Alvin Sugarman at the temple. He said, and I want a bus coming to the temple so we can reenact the story of the temple bombing and then go together to Selma. And as though he was taking the place of Heschel and other rabbis before him, he stood with Congressman Lewis and Coretta Scott King at the peak of that bridge on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and they kneeled and said a prayer. And 20 years before, they watched the billy clubs and the hoses and everything just about kill John Lewis. And Rabbi Sugarman, with tears in his eyes, said, now I look down 20 years later and the world press is there. So let us not say that we have not come miles, even though we have yet miles to go before we rest.
And speaking of Rabbi Sugarman, when I had interviewed him, one of the touching stories that didn't get into the film is when one of the civil rights leaders who was so integral to the civil rights movement, Hosea Williams, was on his deathbed. He talked about holding hands with Reverend Jesse Jackson and how they would be praying over him, literally, and tears would be coming down his eyes. So these sort of proximate emotional stories we don't know about. So I think they're so important. When I interviewed Yavila McCoy, and in the film she talks about how it is important that not only do we hold these historical stories to our hearts, but that we have to become more proximate. And I am hopeful, after the terrible murder of George Floyd, there seems to be a huge push, if you will, for Black-Jewish relations and building bridges throughout the community to really unpack so we can learn from each other personal stories about racism and anti-Semitism and figure out ways to build these bridges and understand each other in deeper ways.
One thing I just registered for later this week, I'm so proud of, the National Jewish Democratic Coalition has done wonderful webinars. But the one later this week is called Black Lives Matter is a Jewish Value. You know, so there you have it. I mean, in the National Council of Jewish Women, our national director has made it clear that Black Lives Matter, and it is a key important thing for the National Council of Jewish Women to state and to make real.
Shari, go ahead, Ambassador Young.
Yeah, I want to get back to this Voting Rights Act because the answer is to the problems that we're facing. The answer is in the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, Senate Rule 4. And all we need to pass that is, I'd say, 10 righteous Republicans. Now, we can pass it without them. But I grew up when there was no television, and we used to look at Superman on the radio. And it came on every day, Truth, Justice, and the American Way. And all we want is Republicans who believe in truth, justice, and the American way. And we ought to be able to find 10. If we found 10, then that would mean that the Senate would be filibuster-proof. And we could get all of these things done. Now, the John Lewis bill is really the same bill that we wrote in 1965. It's been renewed 3-4 times. The last time was when George Bush went, and 97 senators voted for it. So there's nothing that used to be controversial about it. But now there probably will be a lot of propaganda against it. But that bill is truth, justice, and the American way. And it's got John Lewis' name on it, and that's what he lived for all his life. And I used to tell him, I said, John, your political posture is bulletproof. Nobody can get to you. If the black folk get mad with you, the Jewish community will help you. if the Jewish community gets mad with you, the black community will help you. There's nobody that has the security of that kind of support to do the right thing, whatever it is, and whatever you and God determine it to be in your voting in the Congress. And he was never a great orator, but people remember everything he said. And his spirit won more elections for more congressmen. People just wanted him to come to their district. And when he came, he brought an authenticity and a moral authority to that district. And whether you were black or white or brown, John Lewis' presence in your district gave you a blessing, which came out of his suffering and his Black Jewish coalition here in Atlanta. So keep that up.
I remember filming. I'm sorry, Shari, you want to go ahead? But I just remember filming in 2015, just real quick, when President Obama was speaking in Selma, and he was standing next to Congressman John Lewis and President Bush, and just the warmth and the love, and everybody was in tears listening to you can imagine, next to the bridge named after a Ku Klux Klan member, and just the warmth and the love and the hope that was there. It was just incredible.
Are you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I mean, that image too of Republican and the Democratic president really having genuine friendship and admiration. I mean, President Bush spoke at Congressman Lewis's funeral and reemphasized his support, Republican support for voting rights. I mean, it's ridiculous that we can't get it passed today when it's needed so desperately. But I was just going to say, for John Lewis walks on water where the Jewish community is concerned. He never missed an opportunity to speak out against anti-Semitism, to speak in the Kremlin about Soviet Jewry, and quoting from letters from the Birmingham jail, Dr. King's letters explaining why we can't wait for the release of Soviet Jews. He was an advocate for Israel's security. He was such an amazing bridge builder. And it's interesting that Senators Warnock and Ossoff both have such close ties. He was a member of Reverend Warnock's church, and Senator Ossoff worked for him in his early years as a young activist. So his spirit lives on.
Yeah, that is 100% true. Shari, you mentioned earlier about Black Lives Matter, and I want to tie this in with voting rights and really this idea of action and policy, and how the Black Lives Matter movement, which I think has been coined as the biggest social justice movement of our time, at least one of the biggest ones. How do we use this time to actually move the needle in some places around our voting rights amendments and the policy and legislation that we need to protect voting rights and other things, fighting against health inequities and disparities? What is the call of Black Lives Matter to be a part of that?
Well, Black Lives Matter has certainly raised the profile of racism in this country. The COVID panic epidemic also raised the whole issue of health inadequacy. But the challenge to voting rights had brought Blacks, Jews, whites, all minorities together to fight legislation to polls to elect the right people. And I think Black Lives Matter have just raised the issue of the importance of addressing the issues of racism in our country. I know right now in NCJW, we're just galvanizing every energy that we can to fight redistricting. I mean, this is a very scary moment. Not only are we worried about the right to vote and the voter suppression initiatives that are now facing legal channels, we are now looking at the scary results of the census and what's going to happen with Republican-led legislators across the country in what they'll do with redistricting. And so we are in desperate need of passing voting rights legislation at the federal level. And to know that Black Lives Matter is an important voice to be at the table with the coalition. And boy, as sick as Congressman Lewis was in his final days, he mustered enough energy to go out and stand on the sidewalk where the pavement read Black Lives Matter, because he was so committed to the next generation. And he saw in that the next generation, I think, of raising Black voices. They're not the only ones, NAACP and Urban League and many others, but they are a power. And I'm very proud that our Jewish community is acknowledging that.
The thing about Black Lives Matter is that organized by 10 minutes of cell phone filming. And it's a testimony to the technology revolution that a young Black would have the sensitivity to film that. And without that film, we would not have been awakened. It's just like if the beating of John Lewis and Jose Williams on the if that had not occurred on a rainy, cold Sunday afternoon, when most of the people in the North were looking at the judgment of Nuremberg, and then they cut to Bloody Sunday, and people, and we had voting right back. Now I think Black Lives Matter, responding to George Floyd's death and the gruesome pictures of his death, I think that same day I saw that there were demonstrations all the way around the world in New Zealand. I think that means that Facebook, social media gives us another platform that young people can continue to educate themselves about the issues that they're going to have to confront.
Social media has definitely, sorry, I think there's a lot of background. If maybe if everyone mutes until you're ready to speak. Sorry about that if there's a lot of background noise. But the social media platforms have definitely given Black Lives Matter movement and unearthed racial injustices and inequities in a way that we couldn't do many, many years ago. And so the opportunity, for people to witness what they've been witnessing has really pushed the entire country, the entire globe, to understand the impact of systemic racism, of police brutality, of the health inequities that Black and Brown communities have experienced through COVID front and center. And so I think that this is an opportunity for us to continue to build those bridges and come together and fight what's right in front of us. Can I switch gears just a little bit? So I'm thinking a little bit about the lessons learned that you may have gotten from the movie. Is there anything, Dr. Rogers, that you think you would have liked to dive a little bit deeper on? Is there, people or things that you maybe thought about highlighting that you didn't get a chance to highlight? What are some of your thoughts around that? I know you could only fit so much into the movie, and it was a phenomenal movie, but I'm just curious to know, after hearing about feedback from different people and having conversations, is there something that you would love to put in the movie, or maybe there's a part two?
Thank you. Well, we had interviewed a lot of the young folks. We had Harvard students, the Andrew Goodman Foundation, young college students throughout the country, American Jewish Committee, young people we interviewed. So I think getting the younger people's take on looking at the history and really speaking to some of these elderly people that were part of the civil rights movement, to have included that in the film, I think that would have been really exciting for the young people to see. And thank God we did film that, so that we are going to be using some of that footage that didn't make it into the film and creating 10-minute pieces so that the younger generation, which is already starting to really take this on around the country and creating young ambassadors, will be able to look at it. We're doing some great work with Morehouse College and the Israeli consulate, and our University of Michigan head youth ambassador Blake Weissman has galvanized an amazing group of ambassadors around, college ambassadors around the country. So I think it's important to have these intergenerational conversations.
It's amazing. It sounds like that's exactly what you want to happen. And I know that a lot of older people have seen the movie, but really intentionally giving this movie to younger generations so they can understand the history and they can understand how important it is to understand what's happening, what happened years ago, and how that influences what happens today.
You know, I'm amazed in some of the panels that I've been on, particularly when Black clergy will say, gosh, I didn't know anything about this story. And I really want to, you know, I want my congregation to know. I want the Coalition of Black churches in the city to know, and do it with temples. And I'm wondering, Shari, we've never talked about it, but, you know, this film needs to go to the Jewish seminaries and the Black seminaries for discussion, because they're powerful pulpits yet to be energized. And we know that so much of this movement really came from the pulpit, from ministers and rabbis.
Absolutely. And even, and just to add to that, an Orthodox rabbi, Rabbi Berman, who was in Selma at the time when he was in jail, it was Purim. And there was a whole group of young students Jewish students that were in the jail next to him. And he got the Megillah, and he was trying to read them the Megillah, because they weren't there necessarily because of their Jewish identity. They were there because it was the right thing to do. And some of them even were there because they couldn't fight in Nazi Germany, so they wanted to take up the fight in Selma. But Rabbi Berman wanted to infuse some of that Jewish Torah, so that's why he read the Megillah. So just envisioning that, it's just unreal.
You know, you related this to Germany, and it's frightening to me how much, how close some of the fringes are to exactly the methods and the message that Adolf Hitler sold in Germany. And we can't relax, because there were 300 million people. I mean, well, I don't know, but there were just 7 million people difference between the two candidates. And the fact that is this close is frightening to me. But that's because people got insecure about the virus, about the economy, about immigration, and instead of getting leadership, they were being demagogued, and people's fears. I mean, it was ridiculous that they should attack the Capitol as they did in January, and that's too close for comfort for me to what I read happened in Germany. And the presence of all of these guns. In fact, I on Delta one time, one of my last long flights, I was looking at a film about Albert Einstein as a young professor in Germany. And the reason he left and sneaked out was he was coming out of a building one day where he'd been teaching, and stormtroopers in a convertible stopped and stood up and machine gunned a group of Hasidic Jews and drove off. And he realized that he had to get out of Germany, and that's what brought him here. Now, the number of guns that we have floating loose is really scary. And for me, this Black Jewish Coalition is not just because it's morally right and we want to do the right thing. I think our survival is at stake. All of us, all people of goodwill, not just Blacks and Jews, but when you get people to believe in one nation, indivisible, under God, with liberty, that's all we want. As Dr. King said, we want people to live out the true meaning of their creeds. And these are truths that we hold self-evident, that we are endowed not by the state, not by our religion, but by the Creator with these inalienable rights. And amongst these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I think we had a close call. I hope we're out of it, but I don't think we can relax. And I think we've got to continue working. And Shari, I'm glad you realized and recognized the fact that not only is my daughter on board, but my granddaughter and my first great-granddaughter. Trust them to your leadership, and I hope you will involve them in the Black Jewish Coalition. Taylor, my granddaughter, is married to a young Nigerian who is a very sensitive religious young man. I think we need to find another tour to get them to Israel. And I
want to get a treat here.
I'll pay for it.
Okay. All right.
So we are getting pretty close to our time, and this is such a phenomenal conversation. But I would like to ask each of you, maybe with a minute apiece, for a call to action to wrap up and maybe share with the audience one thing you want them to take away from this conversation, and then a call to action so we can continue to do the work. We can continue to be in this fight together. And so I will start with Shari Frank, if you'd like to share.
Well, I would just say that the way to make a difference in the world is through personal relationships. And I've been blessed with the personal relationships that I've had with Ambassador Young, with Congressman Lewis, with Coretta Scott King. So get personal. When you reach out, do more than advocate, really develop a friendship. And secondly, I've been quoted for decades saying, if the world isn't safe for Jews, it won't be safe for African Americans. And if it's not safe for African Americans, it won't be safe for Jews. And we have to do what Congressman Lewis urged us to do, make good trouble, necessary trouble, and redeem the soul of America, in the words of Dr. King.
Amen.
Amen. That's right. Thank you, Shari. Dr. Rogers.
Thank you so much. Well, Shared Legacies, I hope, can be a vehicle to help cure the disease of racism and anti-Semitism by having these important, courageous conversations so that the younger folks can look at these folks who were the civil rights leaders that were really on the front lines of helping change America. We have a long way to go, but I hope that knowing this history conveyed by Shared Legacies, meeting these leaders will make that made progress possible, inspires growth, and gives hope that we can continue to do this once again.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. And Ambassador Young.
Yeah, when my daddy told me about Nazism in New Orleans, in 1936, and I was 4 years old. He said, this kind of racism is, well, he didn't say racism. He said, this kind of white supremacy is a sickness. And you don't let sick people make you sick. And if you get angry, you're falling into their sickness. And he always said, emotional and worked up, the blood runs from your head to your fist and your feet, and you want to fight or run. He said, both of those are a mistake. He said, if you stay calm and use your mind, don't get mad, get smart. And I think at this moment, the young people who are in Black Lives Matter particularly, I think are rightly, understandably, on a freedom. This has been a very successful movement, but it's not a time to get emotional. It's a time to get rational and to be cool and calm and let your mind understand the complications of this society and let your spirit lead you to the reconciliation of all of God's children in his kingdom. Amen.
Amen. I will just repeat what I heard. Beautiful. So much. Building relationships is key. Key to us moving forward, making good trouble. Dr. Rogers, you said curing disease of racism and anti-Semitism has to be one of our goals. And Ambassador Young, let the Spirit lead you. And I think we will close with that. I thank each and every one of you on this panel, my esteemed guests, for being here and sharing of your time and your energy and your expertise and your heart and soul. It means a lot. Thanks for all of you who tuned in to be with us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
And
take care, everyone.
JCPA. Thank you, JCPA.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, JCPA.
Thank you, Yolanda. You're an amazing moderator. Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's
Honor
a pleasure.
to be with you, Ambassador Young and Shari Frank, always.
You know, Yolanda, before we go, Memphis last year, and the mayor of Memphis happened to be Black. And he got elected with 92% of the vote.
Wow.
In Memphis. I mean, not Memphis, in Natchez.
Oh,
See?
wow. That's amazing. Yes, 92%.
He grew up in Natchez. He went off and got a PhD, served in the military, was teaching at Jackson State is right there near Natchez.
Yes.
And when he retired, both Black and white community came to him and wanted him to run for mayor. And that he served his term and has moved to New Orleans now. But it said to me that there is hope. We are making progress, and the struggle continues.
The struggle continues.
God bless you.
Yes.
God bless you.
Yes, that was beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.